say something?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can everybody hear?
Can you hear him?
Okay, great. Okay, yes. I'm Jim McGill. I'm the vice president of the Houston chapter of Society of Professional Journalists. And today we're going to have a meeting on captured journalists and other Americans that are being held overseas. And our speakers are going to be Marc Tice, who's the father of Austin Tice, is appearing in person. Paul Beckett, the Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, is appearing via Zoom, as is Sarah Blake, who's a board member of the Bring Our Families Home campaign. And I think we can get started. The meeting came about after Evan Gershkovich was detained by the Russian Federal Security Service on charges of espionage in March. That made him the second American journalist unjustly held captive in a foreign country. He joins fellow captive Austin Tice, a Houston native and award-winning freelance journalist who is believed to be held by forces aligned with the Syrian government for more than a decade. And these two American journalists are part of a worldwide trend targeting journalists for unjustified arrest and illegal kidnapping. Data from the Committee to Protect Journalists lists 363 journalists from a number of countries who were detained for more than in more than 30 countries, 363 journalists from 30 countries. And I think we'll start off by welcoming Marc Tice and hearing a little bit about his son, Austin, and about his predicament.
Thank you, Jim. Those are for Jim, I hope, because I haven't said anything yet. But I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Am I standing in the right place? Can you see me?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Push it forward just a little bit so that the people who are on Zoom.
Okay.
Forward this way.
Oh, forward
That's
that way.
view.
Okay. Like
There
that?
we go. There we go.
Okay, great. Now I'm afraid you're looking up my nose, but that's okay. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here and glad to become acquainted with the Houston Society of Professional Journalists, which I hadn't been previously. Just to, I could stand here and talk about Austin for longer than we have time, but I do want to say that he is a wonderful, wonderful man. Eagle Scout, attended the University of Houston for 2 years, transferred to Georgetown University, was in Washington when the 9/11 attacks occurred. And that really seemed to spark a special patriotism in him, which led him to join the Marine Corps as an officer in the Marines and do tours of duty in both Iraq and Afghanistan, where he became acquainted with the human cost of the kind of warfare that is happening too many times in too many places now. Lots of urban warfare where civilians are very much in the firing line. And when the conflict broke out in Syria, he was very frustrated that all the reports that were coming through the media would say something like, we understand or we've heard that this happened, but we can't confirm it because we don't have, our own journalist on the ground. And Austin, who had written for every school publication, every school he ever attended, different kinds of articles, even poetry and stories, but he thought that he had the skills and the experience being a Marine, knowing how to handle himself in a war zone, and also being an excellent writer, and took photography classes in preparation for going to Syria because he really wanted to be able to let people know what he knew from his Marine experience about what happened to ordinary people in these kinds of conflicts. So he was there from May till mid-August in Syria, when on August 14th we lost contact with him, and have had no contact with him since then, over 11 years. And the good news, if there is good news, is that we and the United States government remain absolutely confident that he is alive, that he is being treated reasonably well and taken care of. We know that the Syrian government is holding Austin, and that the key to his freedom are discussions between the United States government and the Syrian government, which is something for the last many years. And my wife, Deborah, who's currently in Washington, D.C., pushing for our son, have been focused on, and that is getting direct dialogue between the two countries. And I can tell you that it is just as difficult, it seems, or for us anyway, more difficult in getting that connection, having that dialogue coming from our own government as it might be coming from the Syrian government. There have been some steps towards a dialogue. There have been, over the course of the last, I guess, 3 years, 3 different meetings that we're aware of between the United States government and Syrian officials. However, in my opinion, I'll just speak for myself, our government is still not taking the case as seriously as we would like them to. And recently we've had at least 2 examples of what it looks like when the United States government makes a serious effort to bring an American hostage home. We'd like to see the same kind of effort in Austin's case. And, part of getting there is the engagement of the media. Something else that Deborah and I have worked on for 11 years. And you may not be aware, even if you've been in Houston for that period of time, but we've had billboards around the city with Austin's situation, bigger than life in front of people. Currently, there's a mural on Westheimer near Montrose with Austin and 14 other hostages that are being held. I was telling the incoming president of the Houston SBJ that because Austin's birthday is August 11th, and he was captured on August 14th, and that's when he became silent to us. We get lots of media attention in the month of August and leading up to August. And once those couple of weeks have passed, it's very difficult to get the media, either here in Houston or anywhere else, frankly, engaged to share the story. The question that we always get is, what's new? And for us, what's new is that our son has been a hostage in a hostile foreign country for another day. That is big news to us every day. And we feel like there should be some kind of engagement that lasts longer than a couple of weeks or a month from the media, not only in Austin's case, but in the case of the many other Americans being held, like Evan, who I think Paul will talk about extensively. So with that, I think I've probably used up my introduction time, Jim, and I'll hand it back to you. Thank you very much for being here and listening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and our next speaker is going to be Paul Beckett, and Paul is the Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, responsible for news across politics and government, economics, national security, the Supreme Court, financial regulation, and the intersection of business and Washington. And Paul is going to talk about the efforts to free Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was being held by the Russian authorities on trumped up, I can say that, right? Allegedly trumped up charges of espionage. So, Paul, you want to go ahead and speak?
Thank you very much, Jim. Very good to hear you all. We can't see you, unfortunately, but pleasure. I had the pleasure of meeting Deborah Tice when she was here in Washington last month at events that we coordinated over both Austin and Evan. So it's a pleasure to meet Marc as well. Let me start by giving, first of all, thank you very much for having me on to speak. I'd like to talk a little bit about what this felt like as a journalist on the ground, dealing with this situation that I hope many of you will appreciate, or at least be able to recognize. On March 26th, I was out at dinner in Washington, and it was one of those dinners that we've all been to where there was a CEO in town that was keen to meet Washington journalists, and we went along to a fancy Italian restaurant up in the Union Market area, and all of our big competitors were there. And midway through the appetizers, my phone went off, and I checked it, and it was Emma Tucker, who was our editor-in-chief. She had been in the job about a week, so given that she'd been in the job about a week, I thought I'd better pick it up. So I took myself out of the restaurant to a small courtyard there, and I sat down and I answered the phone, and she said, "Paul, it's Emma. Evan Gershkovich has gone missing, and we think the security services have him." That was a moment that our world changed fairly dramatically, and it has put a huge number of issues into our focus that we had not been dealing with, certainly since the tragic death of Danny Pearl 20 years ago in Pakistan. First order of business was, who is Evan Gershkovich in detail? Evan had only worked for us at that point for about a year and a half. He was hired in Moscow. He'd been working for AFP. And he had dedicated his career, young as he is, he's only 31, to covering Russia. So given COVID, given the Ukraine war, given everything that was going on, very few people on this side of the Atlantic had even met him. His colleagues in Moscow obviously knew him very well. His colleagues in London knew him well because we had already pulled many of our reporters out of Moscow, him included, when the Ukraine war started. So we had our own storage report of who Evan was, and we got to know him very quickly. And he himself has his own fascinating story. He was born in New Jersey, but he's the son of Soviet Jewish emigres who fled persecution in the former Soviet Union to come to New York. And they were in New York, they now live in Philadelphia, and they raised both of their kids, both born here, but raised very much in Russian tradition. So their heritage was very important to them. They used to sing Russian birthday songs, used to celebrate Russian holidays, and Evan grew up as a bilingual reporter, and with such an interest in his heritage, thanks to the efforts of his parents, that he wanted to go back and report on the country. And as he did that, he worked for Moscow Times, then AFP, and then we picked him up. It was very interesting to hear Marc's comments about the type of reporter that Austin is, because I heard many of the similar traits that we know about Evan. Many of the best stories that he's done for us over there were about the consequences of the Ukraine war in Russia on ordinary Russians. He loves Russia. He'd go over there, and many foreign correspondents would go to a post like that and spend their entire time talking to the foreign diplomatic press, the foreign diplomatic corps, or wealthy Russians, or whoever was hanging out in the most Western-oriented parts of Moscow. And instead, he joined soccer teams, and he went to listen to Russian punk bands, and he threw himself into Moscow society. When the Ukraine war started, he was bouncing back and forth between Ukraine and London and Moscow. And we actually sent it back in for stories that we wanted them to report. His specialty was writing about, first of all, the impact of the war on ordinary Russians, and because of the Wall Street Journal, and the great surprise, the impact of the war on the Russian economy. We sent him out to Yekaterinburg, which is about 800 miles from Moscow, to pursue one of those stories. And he was in a restaurant when plainclothes FSB or security services officers came in and pulled his jacket over his head and took him out. And the next, or first that we saw of him after that, was when he was being led out of a armored vehicle into the Fortovo prison, which is a notoriously awful prison in the center of Moscow that the security services use. We didn't know very much on that first night, on March 26th. After about an hour and a half of making phone calls around Washington, went back into the restaurant at the end of the dinner. It was an entertaining little journalistic scenario because all of the competition that was sitting around the table were trying to listen. I had 1 year on this CEO who was wittering on by that point, and everybody else was furtively glancing at the phones because they actually thought I had left to go out and edit and file a scoop that they would all see pop up on their mobile phones while they were sitting at dinner. So I had to reassure them that it was an internal matter, but I didn't say any more than that. And we took off. That led to a pretty furious many days of action. The first thing you do in a situation like that, or that we did in a situation like that, was get hold of the most senior people that we possibly could as fast as we possibly could to let them know the seriousness of the situation, make sure that they knew that we knew what was happening. And the initial calls we had were with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Deputy National Security Advisor Jonathan Feiner, and we had to press them to take it seriously, to let them know what would happen. I give both of them great credit because we both didn't need any persuading. They were very much of the, this is a terrible thing, and the government will do everything it can to get him back and resolve this as quickly as possible. Since then, we had to divide up our efforts really into four channels, and we did not have much experience of this. And one of the silver linings of it has been the extraordinary outpouring of help and advice and solidarity that we've received from other journalistic organizations, both like the SPJ, like the National Press Club, like the Foley Foundation and other groups that are involved in efforts like this, and then also just from our own colleagues at other newspapers with whom we compete, obviously, on every other day, but in this case, I think they all saw a cause where there was an element of the, but for the grace of God, go we. So you may have seen the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal have coordinated on a big advertising campaign. We are now members of a small but very poignant club of news organizations and families and relatives and friends who are pushing for the release of hostages held overseas, including Austin, of course. So there is a community there that was incredibly useful, and we look forward to being useful to anyone else that finds himself in this awful predicament. But the four lanes that we divided ourselves into were government relations, and really pretty quickly we came to understand that that's a matter. There is a special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, SPIHA as it's called, which is part of the State Department and dedicated to bringing hostages home once they've been designated as wrongfully detained. It is also very clear that the National Security Council is very involved in all of this, and ultimately it goes up to the president, and that will be ultimately be the key to unlocking any of these things. It was also very important to us that we make sure that everybody knew that Evan was not a spy. He was picked up on espionage charges. There's a school of thought in these situations sometimes that you should keep quiet and see if the government can resolve it quickly and quietly. In this case, that was not advice that we could countenance, because the Russians had already declared that they had taken our reporter on these patently false, but on these espionage charges. And so we had to respond in kind as loudly and as broadly as we possibly could. So it was hugely important to us that he got designated as wrongfully detained, and that came in record time. Still took 11 days, and 11 days when you are on the front lines of trying to persuade people that even though Evan was out in the country reporting that he was not working for the US government, becomes vital. So it was important to us within days that, first of all, how do you know, right? How do you know your reporter is not a spy? How do you prove that negative? In our case, we were able to get assurances from the government and importantly from the Senate Intelligence Committee that they had all done a scrub and they could reassure us that he was not a spy, let alone reassure the rest of the world. But it gave us extreme confidence in going out and beating the drum very loudly that this was all bogus. And that the Russians were in the business of hostage taking. They were not in the business of counter-espionage when it came to Evan's case. So we shouted out very loudly indeed through social media, through articles, through asking people to say things from podiums, asking senators to tweet. Mark Warner is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. At our request, he was comfortable that Evan was not working for the US government. Tweeted that out, and of course you broadcast that as broadly as you can, really just to counter the Russian propaganda that they think he's a spy, and he will probably at some point be convicted as a spy, completely falsely, but you have to get ahead of it very quickly. And then the 4 channels that we broke into that we're still pursuing are: one deals with the government in the ways I've just been describing, another deals with the campaign of awareness that I've also touched on. That is hugely important. And the Tices have done a very good job with this. Everybody involved knows how important that is. You have no idea whether it will work. And it's really directed at the US government to make sure that the subject, either Austin or Evan, does not slip down into the bureaucracy and get to the point where people don't think they have to make an extra effort to get him back. You have to stay in the face on that. And they know that. You know that, and you have to make it happen. Will it make a difference in the end? We will never know. I don't think we will ever know what difference it makes, but action is better than inaction. And I think you create, hopefully, a landscape on which things can happen that will be out of your control, but we're ultimately will be confident that we'll get Evan home. So you need to create a favorable circumstances, a favorable stage on which all these other actors can pursue their part. The third piece was looking out for Evan himself, obviously paramount, but from a great distance. So we hired lawyers in Russia who see him a couple of times a week. We've mounted a huge letter writing campaign into him. Everything has to be translated in Russian, it goes through the censors, but he's received thousands and thousands of letters at this point. And he has been able to get some letters out. So we know that he's relatively healthy, he's doing all right, but it's under the circumstances, and the circumstances in Moscow jail on bogus charges in a notoriously awful prison. We also need to look out for his family who have had this, almost blackly comic full circle of escaping persecution only to find their son back in Moscow jail. Tragic. They need all of our support. They give us great support. They are hugely strong, noble people. So that has not been difficult, but it's been vital. And then the final piece of it is your own newsroom. What do you do when everybody says, "What are you doing to get our colleague back?" And you need to have an answer for that. You really need to have an answer for that every day. And the short answer is you just try and be the employer that you think Evan would like us to be, because the safety of our reporters is so paramount. We actually have extraordinary security protocols, and they were all followed, and he still got taken. So we have to think about all of these things and really have a big, broad, journalistic-wide discussion about press freedom and the value of foreign correspondency And how do you weigh the value of foreign correspondence against the extraordinary risks that our reporters and reporters from every publication in any hostile country in the world, and there are an increasing number of them, will face when they're there, and decide it's obviously vital, it's vital reporting, but how do you minimize the risk of it and make that risk, make that a risk that we're all willing to continue to take. So that's where we are. It'll be 6 months at the end of this month. And our challenge is going to be to keep the momentum, keep the altitude of what we've done, hopefully to make sure that we can galvanize things so that both Evan and others who are in similar situations, either in Russia or elsewhere around the world, finally get brought back. So thank you for listening.
Okay, great. I think we're going to take a short break before our next speaker. So Sarah, if you could just hang on for a little bit longer. We have some refreshments here that we want to make available. And I think Ruth is going to do something with the audio.
Yeah. This is my steps. I'm ready. We're right in now. Support. We got the refreshments.
I'm not an Apple expert, but I can figure this out. Hello.
Yeah, Dwayne.
Okay.
The volume on the laptop is up as high as it can go.
Which one's minimize? There we go.
But I
Okay.
think it's the monitor
Don't
itself that the volume needs to be up. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm trying to change the
Change the output.
output here to HDMI. There we go. Now it should be coming through the TV. Do we have a remote for the TV?
Well, I'll get that.
Okay. Can we test the sound from the laptop? Can we play a song? Maybe. Ruth, can we play some sound, something that makes sound on your laptop?
Well, you should be able to speak and if it's working, or you.
Well, no, you won't hear yourself through the speakers. If you just play a song or something, so we can see if it'll come.
Oh, God, now everybody's seeing my,
Yeah.
yeah, let's see. Music. What is Apple Music? Is it going to be offensive?
Something to play for. You just get it.
Oh, it's something you play for. Yeah, I can get YouTube. God.
There's ice on the way.
Okay.
Those are plus and minuses.
Yay, yeah, we're, all right.
So what's, oh, so you
Yeah, no,
fixed
it's
it.
good, we're good. You can
Okay.
close that. It's good. The Zoom will come through the TV now.
Okay. Let's just test that out.
And will the microphone work?
The
We
microphone
don't,
will still be the laptop.
yeah. Sarah, do you want to say something, unmute and say something so we can test what we changed? Sorry, I'm short.
That's okay. Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Okay, now we need to change it. Into
Okay, hang on one second.
Sure.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm just changing the sound in Zoom.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, oops. Will you say something, please?
Hello.
Oh, okay, cool. And let me raise the volume a little bit. And one more time.
Hi, hello.
Okay, one more.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're all set.
Okay, great.
You want to see them or them? Sitting back here blind. Well, maybe you should sit. And then when you want to jump in, just into the camera side of the equation.
One moment.
Yes.
I think colors are a lot of going, some area.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to resume. For the second part of the meeting, we wanted to broaden out the discussion a little bit beyond just journalists that are being held and to just regular, ordinary Americans that are being held in different countries overseas. And to do that, we have Sarah Blake. She's representing the Bring Our Families Home campaign. And Sarah is the sister of Luke Denman, who was wrongfully detained in Venezuela since May of 2020. She's on the steering committee of the Bring Our Families Home campaign, which is a group that's made up entirely of families of Americans held hostage or wrongfully detained overseas. And Sarah, I think there was one of the people that your organization represents is among the five hostages in Iran that they're currently negotiating for their release. So if you'd like to address that or say anything else about your organization.
Yes, we actually represent at least two of those families that are have just kind of been on pins and needles for the last couple of weeks, waiting to see what's going to happen with that. So we're not going to celebrate till they're actually home, but it's a good first step. I would like to say that the main focus of our campaign is to advocate for the immediate release of wrongfully detained Americans using any and all tools available. Some of the advocacy initiatives we've had include commissioning 2 wheat paste murals. The one in Houston, that's in the Montrose area off of on Westheimer, and then one in Washington, D.C. And those are really neat because it's a wheat paste material which fades over time, which represents the fact that these people's lives are also fading away the longer they stay in prison. We also participate in the Run with Jim with the Jim Foley Foundation every year. During the United Nations General Assembly, we had in New York, we had sidewalk decals and digital projections with the faces of hostages and our logo and some messages for President Biden. We've also partnered with Brittany Griner and the Phoenix Mercury. They had our Bring Our Families Home campaign logo decal on the sideline of their home court all season this summer. They also have a mural at their Footprint Center where they play basketball. And then Brittany Griner also partners with Round 21 to design t-shirts and hoodies with 10% of those proceeds going towards our Bring Our Families Home campaign. Currently, we have a digital media campaign going following the journey of Jorge Toledo, who's a former hostage from Venezuela. He was one of the so-called Citco 6. He's training for the 2023 Marine Corps Marathon. So we have a campaign following his journey for that. We have had 11 Americans, not including the ones who are hopefully about to come home, in our campaign freed since our launch. And I do also want to mention that journalists play a really important role in helping to cover American citizens being wrongfully detained, to help educate the general public in wrongful detention and making sure they're not continuing the propaganda that's perpetuated by these other countries. And one last thing I want to mention is being held in a foreign prison, like Russia, Iran, China, Venezuela. Again, it's not like being held in prison here. We have to pay for food for them because they get a tiny amount of food and will starve if we don't give them food, or it's bad food that they can't eat. They oftentimes don't get outside. I know Brittany Griner was kept in a cage that was much too small for her. A lot of them are kept in very small areas. They don't get to have visitors, family visitors. We don't get regular communication. Some of us haven't communicated in a very, very long time with our loved ones. I know for Luke, we have to pay for their laundry service. We have to pay for their toilet paper. We have to pay for their bed sheets. They don't always get medical attention. So it's not like being held prison in the United States.
Okay, and Mark, do you mind coming up here so that
No.
the other speakers can hear? Wanted to ask a couple of questions. And first of all, for Mark, how would you characterize the differing responses you received from the different presidential administrations since Austin has been held for so long? How would you characterize, say, the Trump administration versus Biden's administration?
Yeah, well, of course, Austin was arrested during the Obama administration. So we've had experience with three different presidents, all of whom we have met and spoken with, and all of whom expressed their commitment to bringing Austin home and using all available resources to do so. The tricky thing that we found, and this is true across administrations, is that the United States government is an enormous machine. You could call it, an enormous bureaucracy, and really the president, given everything that's on his plate, has to rely on, the dozens and hundreds and thousands of people working in the different departments to exercise, their authority to, achieve what he accomplishes or wants to accomplish. So, what we found is that the engagement, the sustainment of engagement by different parts of the government, in spite of each of the president's commitment to do everything they can, has been the largest obstacle. And, Deborah and I frequently say that we feel like when one of us or both of us are in Washington and we're meeting with, people in Congress and the Senate and people at the State Department, people at the White House, we feel like as soon as we get on the plane to head back, they have to go back to their normal other responsibilities, and that's completely understandable. We can't expect an entire government to, prioritize their time on 1 or 2 or 63 American hostages. So, I guess I would say each administration has been supportive, but as far as what we are seeking, which is sustained engagement between the Syrian government and the United States government, none of them have been really able to make that happen. They've made efforts in different degrees, but still haven't accomplished, what we're really seeking. And I do want to, if I may, just kind of make a couple of remarks based on what was said by the other speakers, and that is that I painted the media and the government with a pretty broad brush, and I want to correct that because we have had some tremendous allies. One of the newer ones being the Bring Our Families Home group, which we very much appreciate. They're the ones responsible for the mural I mentioned and was mentioned again with Austin on it, and we appreciate their efforts. My sister and nephew actually went to a Phoenix Mercury's game where they honored Austin, in amazing ways. And also I'd like to say that the two primary outlets that Austin worked for, which was the Washington Post and the McClatchy newspapers, both have been extraordinarily supportive. The Post is running full page ads about Austin on a regular basis to try to maintain awareness. And now having partnered with, for unfortunate reasons, the Wall Street Journal, there are advocates and people, doing the best they can within media. Our frustration is that, broadly speaking, it's so difficult to maintain, the awareness and to reach everyone that we would like to reach with the message. So, and I see a nodding head there. So, yeah. Anyway, so sorry for the long answer to the question.
No problem. Yeah, and I just wanted to address this question to all the speakers. And recently, Bill Richardson passed away, and he was many things over the course of his career: governor of New Mexico, Secretary of Energy, and a few more posts that I don't remember offhand. But he's probably best well known for bringing home Americans who are being held overseas, and as an independent diplomat, not as part of the government. And would you like to address the kind of role that these third-party groups play in helping bring Americans home, and whether you see that as being helpful in your particular case that you're interested in? And Mark, you talked about this a little bit. We talked about this during our radio interview. What do you say about these third-party interventions?
Yeah, well, I mean, Paul mentioned the advice to stay silent, which is the advice that we initially got, about Austin. What we found was that staying silent meant that no one was accountable for doing anything. And so, the families of hostages at that time when Austin was first taken, got together and kind of created our own group to try to drive changes in government. And that was very successful. And since then, we've seen, the Bring Our Families Home group. We've seen a lot of individuals engage. Bill Richardson, well known, I think, to most of people that have been in this kind of situation. It depends very much on the circumstances, but I would say on the whole that they play an important role and can actually, accomplish things that can't be accomplished, through governmental channels.
And Paul, what role do you think that these kind of third-party diplomats play in Evan's case?
Obviously, Governor Richardson did a huge amount of good in this area. Is not someone that we had engaged in. I think Russia wasn't his area of specialty, to be honest. I don't think it's a place that he had a huge amount of experience, and we'd rather put our chips in with the US government at this early stage. I think we were in touch with the Richardson organization, and they will have offers to be helpful, and there may, of course, come a time where we want to revisit that with them. The third parties obviously are very important in terms of their support, and we greatly appreciate it, and helping keep awareness very high. The other, I suppose you call them third parties, but really third countries, is an area that we think the US government could be very aggressive in pursuing, because very often they have lines into, I assume, to the Syrians, but certainly to the Russians, that the US, because of the state of relations between the two countries, just don't have. So there are certainly intermediary countries that I think or could be a very useful part of this equation. And if it does come down to a prisoner swap at some point, which is what the Russians in our case have suggested, the way that they might see this resolved at some point, then for whom, and really the broader the net of Russians convicts you can find in allied countries around the world, the better. It's a question of persuading the allies to give them up for our cause. So I think there's obviously lots of roles for various other independent diplomats in the Richardson model, or third countries who want to be helpful and have lines that you don't have in to be helpful. We'd love to see the government use all of those in the same way that we'd love to see it use anything it could possibly think of to bring Evan and everyone else home.
And Sarah, same question to you. What role do you think that independent negotiators have in bringing people home?
Specifically, Bill Richardson and his center have played a huge role in my brother's detainment. He's personally went to Venezuela on more than one occasion to negotiate on Luke's behalf. When the US government, because we don't have a great relationship with Venezuela, they don't want to engage with Maduro. Bill Richardson stepped in and engaged with Maduro over multiple times. So for me personally and our family, he was made a huge difference and was a huge advocate for us. But yeah, I'm not familiar with any other organizations really that are doing the same exact thing. His death recently has been a huge loss to our community. He's one of the first organizations that acknowledged Luke being wrongfully detained in Venezuela and has been fighting for us nonstop the whole time.
Okay, and my next question has to do with a couple of people mentioned Brittany Griner and her recent release in exchange for a Russian criminal that was being held here. And what do you think about this model of prisoner exchange? Do you think that this is something that the US government should pursue in Evan's case or in Austin's case?
Yeah. That's ultimately a question for the US government, but they did create the special envoy for hostage affairs to essentially do whatever it takes to get someone home. That's the mandate of that office, is to bring hostages back. So the US government has put its sanction on doing deals to get prisoners home. I think there was obviously a fair amount of controversy. Happy for Brittany Griner to be brought back, but a fair amount of controversy around why her, why not very specifically Paul Whelan, who's been there for 4 years plus on the same kinds of charges as Evan. I know from the government standpoint, and I do think they wrestle with this, but our reporting suggests that they were not prepared to trade Paul Whelan for Victor Boot. So if people say, hey, why Griner and not Whelan, I think our reporting would suggest that the US government's view was better to get one out than hold out for two. Why leave two there if you can get one out, and if getting one out means you give them someone whose nomica was the merchant of death, so be it. So I mean, that's the sorts of calculations they have to make. I don't actually think it was ultimately a choice between Brittany Griner or Paul Whelan. I think they tried to get both of them, and the Russians would give them only one. So I think they have to make these awful calculations, and you can certainly see an argument where they'll say this will go on, that everyone that they trade means that you show whoever's held him hostage that it's a worthwhile pursuit. I don't think Evan was taken because of what he was reporting on. I don't principally think he was taken because of a journalist. I think he was taken because they saw another opportunity to take a hostage, a high-profile hostage that they could trade for someone they want to back. So the cycle is underway. It will continue. There's never going to be anybody who says, don't do that when it's one of your people that is on the other side. One of the things that we think would be effective, or at least was worth a shot, is, what are the ways to deter the action in the first place? Not, make awful Solomonic kind of decisions about who to bargain over, but how do you stop the incentives? One of the suggestions we've made as a company in our advocacy role to the US government is you slap very, very, very serious sanctions on anybody who does this, on the understanding that those sanctions get lifted as soon as that person is released, right? So sanctions tend to stay on forever, but if you had maximum sanctions, maximum pain, on the understanding that there would be relief as soon as it was resolved, it would be one way for them to think about it, because otherwise I do think it's an industry for the countries that do it.
And Sarah, from your point of view, do you think that this would be a helpful way to get your brother home?
Well, yeah, Venezuela has made the offer for Alex Saab in exchange for every single American held in prison. So I would very much like for that to happen. I mean, he's only here for money laundering. So, I mean, I really don't care about that. I would like the Americans to come home.
I think one of the US government factors I didn't mention is if you look at the apparatus of agencies that are involved in these discussions, one of them is the Justice Department. And it's the Justice Department you have to persuade that it is worthwhile sending back someone that they have gone to great lengths to catch and convict in return for your loved one. So I mean, that's just a fact of life, and you can see it from the Justice Department's perspective. They put a lot of resources into putting bad people away. They need to see those bad people return to their home countries. But that's a topic for the US government to sort through. They're definitely aware of it. I don't know what the best solution is.
And Mark, what's your point of view? Do you think that you would like to see Austin exchanged for some bad guy that we're holding here?
Well, as Paul said, you're going to be hard pressed to find a parent or a relative that will say, no, don't do that, leave my loved one, in captivity. I think, though, and just relating to Austin's case specifically, there has been no indication that there's an interest in a trade. Where there is an interest, I think it should be pursued, my personal feeling. But I think the bigger picture is, and certainly true with Austin's situation, is to do what President Biden, directed his national security advisor to do, which is, talk to the Syrian government, find out what they want, and work with them to bring Austin home. Paul mentioned sanctions. And of course, Syria is one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. That has not proven to be effective in doing anything except causing hardship for the Syrian people. I don't think there's anyone in or around the Syrian presidential palace that's suffering from the sanctions that we have put on. And I will say that none of those sanctions were put on for Austin specifically at all. I mean, they all predate largely his captivity. So I really think you have to look at what will work and be prepared to, work with that, negotiate that as best as possible to bring people home. And I think that's going to be different in many different situations. If it was as easy as trading prisoners every time someone went captive, I think we'd have a much simpler set of circumstances all around.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor to any questions from the audience of any of our speakers. Ruth?
Question, yeah, it's for Sarah and Mark, just, it's not journalism oriented per se, but how do you get through this?
Did you hear the question?
How do you
How-
get through this? Was that it?
How do you get, yeah, how do you get through this?
We don't really have a choice. We just wake up every morning thinking about our loved ones and what we can do to help them. We go to bed every night wondering if we've done enough. We try to take care of our own mental health in the meantime. It is really exhausting, especially when it's been multiple years of just nonstop. You do have to kind of take some time and set a few boundaries for yourself to make sure you get some sleep and try to find the joy in the smaller things in life and try to find the small victories and appreciate those. But the main thing is we don't have a choice but to go through this.
And Mark, you've been through this longer than anybody. How do you cope?
Well, what Sarah said is true for us as well. You do what you think you can do every day, when you wake up and you go to bed and you wake up thinking about what can I do next. Something Paul said really resonated with me, that being active, doing something is better than doing nothing. And we never know whether the actions we take, whether they be, here in the United States with the media, with the government, or whether they be in the Middle East, through contacts and that we've established and contacts that we get from people. And we never know if those things are going to be important. So we pursue everything we can. And that's frankly, I know if Deborah was here, she would say that her faith keeps her going and is kind of her place of respite. For me, it's the pursuit, the knowing that we're doing what we can. And it's just something that, I tell people that if their child was in the same situation, they would do what we're doing, which is everything you can. And it's just the way it has to be.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, Sandy?
So as an industry, we're struggling with ownership and downsizing and people reporting actual news and all kinds of things. But what more can those of us who are still trying to make our way in this industry and cover these issues, what more can we do to keep this consistently in front of people's eyes and ears, to bring more awareness so it doesn't fall off the table, like Mark said, for 11 months and then pop back up for their family only in August?
Paul, did you hear the question?
I didn't, I'm afraid.
Okay. Basically, she's saying with all the downsizing of journalistic organizations and everybody spending all of their time and efforts just to keep their own jobs, what can journalists do? What can people that practice this do to keep this before the public, and how can we keep the ball rolling?
Thank you for the question, and appreciate it. Events like this, talking about it, getting to know Evan. Even if you go to wsa.com, there's huge resources there for writing to him, for promoting him, his cause on social media, reading his articles. I think, if anybody wants to have any events that would spread the word about him, we are very, very happy to partner with people to do that. Every Wednesday at 10:30, the Wall Street Journal newsroom does a tweet storm around Evan to mark another week that he has been held. So any contribution to that effort is really gratefully received. And I think in a slightly more karmic way, keep him in your thoughts. Think about him, talk about him, get to know him so that it means something to you as well. And that in turn will mean a lot to him, and it will mean a huge amount to us. So I do think it's a question of each individual just finding a level of participation, however small, that will make the difference to be part of that cause. So we're grateful for anything that you can think of to do, including this. We're very honored to be included. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Yes, Mohammed.
I'm a member of Amnesty International USA, and I'm a president of the local chapter here. And in the past, we have written letters, and in situations like where journalists in overseas countries have been imprisoned, we have written letters and made telephone calls. Does our action help or hurt, or can we do more as members of Amnesty International?
Okay. Did you hear the question? Mohammed is a member of Amnesty International, and he's the president of the local chapter. And he wanted to know, is what that organization doing? Are they helpful? And is there anything more that they can do that they're not doing now? Paul,
I'm not familiar with what they are
go ahead.
doing, so I'm not sure I can speak to that.
There may well be, I'm sure there are efforts by Amnesty on Evan's behalf, but that hasn't been a connection that I've been involved with or aware of. So maybe the answer is yes. Between Sarah and I, we don't know. We'd love to talk more about it.
And Mark, are you familiar with the work that Amnesty International does?
I'm broadly familiar with the organization, but not familiar with what you might do or are doing, in these kind of situations. As to the answer, does it help or does it hurt? My general feeling is, done in collaboration with the families and the organizations that are, have the most vested interest, that it more than likely can help rather than hurt. So I'd be very interested in talking with you further. One of the things that I think it's on our website actually is that we ask anyone that might have any amount of influence with Syria or someone, related to the Syrian government, contact us and let us know, and we'll work with you to try to make that help.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, I think that about wraps things up. I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank Sarah and Paul for joining us and dealing with all the Zoom technology snafus. And Mark, I want to thank you. And anything that the local SPJ chapter can do,
Thank you.
just
I'm
let us know.
very happy to be connected with you now.
Okay.
So thank you.
All right.
And thanks to Sarah and Paul as well.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
For having me.
Okay.
Good job.
Yes, it's the end of it. Can I just say a closing word?
Sure.
Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. If you haven't, please do, sign